Welcome to the Superversive live stream for Sunday, the 27th of May, 2018. I am here with April Freeman, who is with me as a contributor to the Earth Anthology. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. To the only show where the contestants are probably saner than the announcer, usually. April, tell us about the Earth Anthology.
Thank you, Ben. So the Earth Anthology is the fourth release of the Planetary Anthology that has been coming out from Superversive Press. It's coming out this June 5th, I believe, and keep a lookout for that. The theme for Earth is daring deeds, because we Earthlings are crazy and we like to do a lot of crazy stuff, so I think that's roughly what it's about. My story, for anyone that doesn't know, I've been writing a story for each of the planetary anthologies, and it's all slightly interconnected, following the same family line. And my Earth story is actually where my timeline starts. There's two main families in my timeline: the descendants of Alan Shepard and the descendants of Yuri Gagarin. So in my Earth story, it's actually I can't remember if there's grandsons or great-grandsons, and they're on a race to try and get to Mars. And that's what my story is about. And Alan Shepard's grandson has a bit of a rough landing, and there's a bit of a confrontation between the two. And you'll have to read the story to see how it goes. But that's the very start of my timeline, so it's kind of fun.
I am ever hopeful for sword fights. Now, I'm also going to say a big hello to Daddy Warpig, who is joining with us to talk about Solo, and I'm sure, anything else science fiction writing related. How are you doing today, Daddy Warpig?
Same as always.
You sound jovial. All right.
He always sounds like that.
Good.
True.
His introduction to his podcast, Geek Gab, is so flamboyant. It's infectious.
It is. It's fantastic. I've got my own story in Earth Anthology. It's called Ringlun. It's about a guy who's turned himself all the way into robots to escape some nanotechnology that's hell-bent on finding him, picking his brain, and turning everything into gray goo, because, of course, why not? And by the end of it, he's on a race to escape and perhaps find some way to destroy them. Whether or not he succeeds, you have to find out, won't you? Huh?
Exactly. So that's coming out on the 5th. If you just can't wait for some good stories from Superversive Press, you could go check out the other anthologies. I know I have a story in each. There's Mercury, Mars, and Venus, all excellent collections of stories. So I'm looking forward to the ones on Earth.
I am too.
And Mars is about growing potatoes on Mars. Is that what That's what I got from the movie.
I don't know if anyone's actually grown potatoes on Mars in any of those stories.
That was the best pamphlet on potato growing I have ever read.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I think 3 of my stories are actually on Mars in all of my planetary stories. Earth is on Mars. Mars is on Mars, and Uranus is slightly on Mars.
I'll remind everyone that there are still a bunch to come out. Yeah. I know Soul is still open, and it will be until September, because I'm the editor for that, and I literally don't care. If you've got a story and you get it in before like November or something, drop a line to the Planetary Anthology.
I've only got 2 more stories to finish writing them done. Well, not counting Uranus.
Good. Is Neptune still open?
I don't think it is, but I have a spot saved for me.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It'll be a lot of fun.
You interested in contributing anything, Daddy Warpig? Little short story for a few little beer money?
I am not writing fiction right now.
Maybe if we do a constellation anthology, except I think Jason will kill us if we try and spring another anthology too soon.
Oh, I would kill us if we're on anthology too soon. I think I've got 4 stories for Soul so far, and it's like,
Don't worry, mine's gonna be fun. My plan for Soul is I'm gonna write a story, but I'm going to my attempt is gonna be some sort of epic poem for my story.
Hey, as long as you call on the right muses and everything else like that, and it works out great. You know, have the sun, not on Mars, but the sun.
Yeah.
Unless it's a desert on Mars, overlooking a lens, expanding the sun so it can actually be hot on Mars.
That could be
That's
nice.
also cool.
All right, well, I gotta go. Thanks for having me on. Everyone, go check out Earth. It'll be great.
It will be, probably. But I'm a little more excited for hold on, April.
What was that?
You want to keep talking about Sheik of Mars, or are you headed out?
No, I gotta go. You guys have fun though.
See you later.
All right, bye.
All right. So we're in the part where we can talk about. Are you under any time constraint, Daddy Warpig?
Yes, but it's not for another 2-3 hours. So I'm going to be on another podcast tonight.
I'm looking forward to that. The Red Pill Religion podcast.
Yes.
Or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll chat a bit, I guess. So while you're here, take a seat, have some tea. But we could talk about Sheik of Mars for a bit. Daddy Warpig, if there's one super unique, sort of unknown, unheard of genre of fiction that you could read, what would it be?
I would say that the most unknown genre of fiction I go of is more of an umbrella genre. It is astounding to me, once I ran into it and read most of it, that so few of classic, even instrumental, seminal works of fantasy and science fiction from before 1940 or so, or 1939 or so, have simply been wiped away. People have forgotten all about them. And the pulps are unjustly maligned by a great number of people and are tragically overlooked and forgotten. And I think people should make a concerted effort to revive interest in and knowledge of those stories.
Absolutely. Now, to my mind, I firmly agree with you for the best of them. Sometimes I'm trawling through Project Gutenberg, and I find something from way back when, from like Gernsback Hugo days and all that jazz, and I think, you know what, I'm okay with this being forgotten. But then I come across some like real gems. Let me actually see if I can find it. But there's I think the name of it's like Swanson. What's the name for it? It's from Amazing Frontiers, but it's Swanson Dispatcher, I think. And it's about a guy who directs traffic in between the planets, and he diffuses a mutiny, and he does all kinds of crazy things from a desk on Earth as he's communicating outward. It's a pretty good story, and I think, wow, that story should not have been forgotten. It's humorous, it's adventurous, but it still keeps you within this sort of like lawyery, look, man, I'm just trying to direct traffic here sort of setting. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, especially concerning how vapid fiction has gotten recently. For my money, the fiction I want to read the most, but I cannot find enough good representations of it, good examples of it to scratch that itch, is Arabian storytelling from like back in the Victorian era. Like, we've got Arabian Nights and Vathek, and those are the two that people should remember. I'm sure you've read Arabian Nights at least as a kid.
Yes.
Have you read Vathek?
No.
It is. It's about the same time as it's Victorian. I actually have a second edition volume, which I'm pretty proud of. But basically, it's about an Arabian guy, prince, who's seeking knowledge and wisdom and eternal life and things man is not meant to have, and eventually pays the ultimate price for it. It's an overlong and very dramatic morality tale, from everything from the evils of an overbearing mother with potentially deathless harem slaves to seeking knowledge beyond the ken and visiting hell for some reason. They're they just walk into hell, such as their evil. It's pretty interesting stuff. But the reason why I bring this up is because it inspired me so much that I wanted to write a book called Sheik of Mars, where I take the poetry and the language and diction and all that jazz and sort of combine it into a modern science fiction setting. It's the same sort of beats as a pulp novel, where there's you set up the characters, you have adventure. Now, I'll admit I probably took a chapter too long to really boil it down. But chapter 4, I have a nice little motorcycle race at night in the canyons of Mars towards Olympus Mons. And I'm proud to say I did the research to get the geography right. And and I combined the pulpy action of sword fighting and gunplay and dramatic duels and exotic locales with the language, diction, beat, and all that good stuff of those old Victorian stories.
There is a book called The Encyclopedia of Fantastic Victoriana. It was published in 2005, and it's literally an encyclopedia of all of these types of stories and characters and plots and culture and stuff from the Victorian era. And so it covers historic Victoriana. So it'll have, Sherlock Holmes, and it'll have Gothic tales. And
what was the name of it again?
The Encyclopedia of Fantastic Victoriana.
Because that sounds like it's Victoriana. It sounds like it's exactly what I want for myself.
It is huge. It's written by Jess Nevins, and it has only recently been released in ebook format, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited if you want to check it out. But I started doing research for a particular project, and I only got just past A before I had to turn to other stuff. But just in the first letter of the alphabet, I found so many characters, so many story types, and just such an insight into Victorian era and culture it blew my mind. It is shocking how many authors were read worldwide, were as famous in their day as Harry Potter is in our day, that just a generation later dropped off the map. Nobody remembers them. Nobody reads them. It is astounding. But if you want to, here's the thing. One of the things that makes your fiction great, or that you can use to make your fiction better, is to go back in time and look at what types of characters and situations and stories and tropes were in use, and those that have survived for a long period of time, even if they later got forgotten by the 20th century, if you go back and revive those, go back and pick them up and use them again in a story of your own making, you can make a very compelling story, because these are worn tropes. These are tried and true. People respond to them. And if you can put them into your story, then you can supercharge a story with stuff that will seem absolutely new and original to your audience, because they won't be familiar with them unless they've done the same research you have, but it will be compelling and interesting nonetheless. That is what Steven Spielberg did with Indiana Jones. That's what George Lucas did with Star Wars. They went back a couple of generations and found stories that had been discarded, that weren't being used, found story elements that had been discarded and weren't being used. And because they revived those, now they set their stamp on it. They own those. Steven Spielberg and Indiana Jones owns the adventuring archaeologist archetype. And George Lucas owns space opera, and that may continue for another couple of generations or another couple of decades, at least until people get so sick of Star Wars they look to something else. So I would highly recommend writers go and check out the Encyclopedia of Fantastic Victoriana by Jess Nevins, and use it to supercharge your writing, even if your writing has nothing to do with the Victorian era.
Oh, I know I'm going to be reading through this myself. There's nothing I love better than drudging through like a bunch of my old books or adventure stories and all that jazz, and just finding some gem that's like, you know what, this is a little rough. I'm gonna polish it up, you know, and kapow, genie. Which actually brings it up, like, because everyone who's read it has been super impressed by the nanotechnological genie I've added in, which is just one of a few different things I specifically went out of my way to include in this story, because you cannot have an Arabian story without a genie. It'd be a very, very poor example, as much as a gumshoe without his trusty sidearm, or a thug without his toothpick. Not worth reading at all. I find it interesting talking about Victoriana, because like when I think about Victorian fiction and stuff like that, and then I think about what we moderns think of as Victorian fiction, and I have an image of steampunk in my head, which I know simply doesn't belong, because they're wearing the corset all wrong, I'm sure, among other things. It's got all the trappings, but none of the spirit, which I find sadly, you know, lacking. Doesn't really bring the joie de vivre, or however you pronounce it, joy of living to it.
It is a sad commentary on modern American culture that so many of and here's the thing, this is where I'm getting back to. It's a sad commentary that so many great things of the past have been thrown away for such foolish and flimsy reasons. And people now are being taught of colonization. And because of that, all of the old cultures of Europe are viewed to be absolutely evil, and they have every possible evil that the modern age can dream up heaped on them, and people just look at them with contempt. And so Rudyard Kipling, people don't want to study him because he was a colonizer, and so on and so forth, and they keep themselves ignorant of much great and good stuff by so doing.
Oh yeah. Like they'll look at something and they'll sneer at it. Oh, it was made by a white man or something like that back in the day. You know, probably owned slaves, you know, or whatever. And it's like, no, this was an Englishman in Victorian times, and England was one of the first places to ban slavery. It was the first European power anyway. You're wrong. You just want to burn down the past and replace it with things that aren't that good. Like I'm a little bit tolerant. I don't mind a bit of irony, a bit of post-irony here and there, but it's like they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Like it's nothing compared to what it used to be. And one of the things that I do worry about is that we have like, even though the way we read some of the old pulp stuff is usually online, there are still physical copies in circulation. I know, and if I could find it, I know where it is. Actually, I'll pull it out in a bit. I know where I can find the Swanson Dispatcher, like which astounding stories or amazing stories or whatever, tales or whatever it was that it was in. Like, I've literally found the physical copy and brought it in. When I publish Sheik of Mars, you can purchase a physical copy for $12.99. What a steal! But it's not the same thing as being distributed to the stores. It is a real fear of mine that I will put myself into so many different books. And if the internet goes down, you know, it's like the ending, except for the physical copies that I keep myself, because I do keep a physical copy of everything I write. It'll be one of those things like at the end of Blade Runner. You know, he's like, oh, all these memories like dust in the rain. You know, my stuff will be forgotten. My friend's stuff will be forgotten. And maybe there's some like nuclear-proofed bunker that Amazon has somewhere in the Pacific Northwest or whatever that has a copy of everything. Maybe it'll be preserved. Maybe something will be found. But that's okay, I guess, if that's what happens. I don't like the idea of it, because we can still find, you know, Vathek and second editions and London bookstores and whatever else you might find, but it's not the same anymore. You know, all this talk about the old stuff and people who are forgotten, like, obviously I don't remember them, because even though I am a historian, I'm not that good of one. I remember when, I can't remember what book Charles Dickens was writing, but it was one of those serials he was publishing in a magazine. And the people, for like one of the last issues, like, he was finally killing off the sickly child character, some orphan the main characters had picked up, and the people were lining the docks, shouting at the captain whether or not little Mel, or whatever her name was, lived, or whether she had finally succumbed to consumption or whatever, coughing, so pitifully as she did. And I just think back on that stuff, and it's like, wow, that stuff's pretty cool. And I can sort of see that happening again with like Galaxy's Edge and a few other things, where like everyone's kind of like on tenterhooks for it, and they want to see what the next one is, and it's kind of like the old serials or whatever. They were, not that I remember them.
The more modern culture gives in to the stifling Iron Maiden of, or Procrustean bed of political correctness, the better anyone who rejects that will seem in comparison.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure. I've got a lot of worries about the future, but right now they're just worries. It hasn't happened yet. I would love to see people writing old-fashioned adventure stories, and I would love to see a brand new generation of audiences discovering how great adventure stories can be, and learning that reading doesn't have to be this brutal, ugly slog through terrible, terrible books.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, I've not even read, just to show you how much I just hate these books, I have not even read one complete work that Chuck Wendig has done. But he throws me, anytime I see an excerpt, he throws me into such a rage that my mind goes, if only he were here right now, I'd chop off his hands, it's like, oh. And he uses things like herkily-jerkily in a sentence. Daddy Warpig, I'm not a violent man, but things like that push me to violence. I'm sure people understand. If I might recommend something to you, my grandfather happened to have, my grandmother was a little bit crazy, and she threw away all his books, but he happened to save a very old adventure story from his own childhood called The Argonauts of the Amazon. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
It is one of those adventure stories. 3 friends go down to the Amazon on a map to search essentially for El Dorado. It's been about a year since I read it, so it's a little bit hazy, but you've got some great fights. They're going down the Amazon. There's some interesting characters. It's one of those things where I can see, how they refer to certain, black characters from the Amazon. It's like, But at the same time, like, it's such a good adventure story. Like, there's this one scene where the Scottish, like, Highlander, like, who's fresh from whatever war England was fighting at the time, wrestles this Amazonian giant on a cliff face. And, like, there's a certain type of Scottish wrestling where you're basically hugging the other man, and then like you're tossing each other about in a weird hug thing. Like, I can't describe it any way better. Like, they're literally like grasping each other body to body and straining at each other. And there's even an image of it. And like eventually, like, they like fall off the cliff, but the Scotsman, of course, survives because it's only like halfway through the book. And of course, they find El Dorado, and they have desperate fights against the Amazonian cultists and half breeds with the Spanish conquistadors there, and it's just great fun. Like it's just fun. No moral message other than maybe sacrificing people to your snake god is wrong. Sometime when I'm a more experienced writer, I want to get myself up to where I can write like a book every 2 months. I'm down to 4 months to write a book, which is better than a year. But sometime, like for Castalia House or Superversive or Silver Empire or any of the other good ones, Bane even, I don't write military sci-fi. It just doesn't interest me, so I don't think I'll ever interest them as a writer. But I want to write like an Indiana Jones style series where about 7 books called like Bold and the Brave, and it's some white guy and an Indian like partner in a business like going on adventures for a professor, archaeologist professor in various settings. I think it would be a real good time if we start like getting all these old genres back up again, just because there's nothing really else out there. Have you met Corey McCleary yet?
No, I've been on podcasts with him, but I've never met him.
Well, I mean in that way. I considered myself to have met you, even though we have not met in person. What was I saying? Like he will rant. As I will rant about science fiction and what they're doing to it. But he will rant about literary fiction and how, like, most of it, like 80, 90% or whatever, is just like these old professors having sexual exploits with their nubile students. And it's just so unpleasant. Not his rants. His rants are actually, like, nice, sort of things. But just the idea that they exist and they're like that is so unpleasant to me. It makes me want to write my own literary novel with actual like depth to it. I do not think it will be too hard. Oh
well. I despise literary realism. I think it's a terrible, horrible, horrible, awful, terrible, awful style. I hate reading books that are written according to that, and I just avoid it whenever possible.
You see how I would do it? I would start it off hyper realistic, and then I'd start adding fantasy elements slowly but surely, and then like sort of weave it all in together, like it's some trick of the elves or whatever. That literature is so miserable and writers so hollow-chested. Not us, of course, but anyone who's promoted to mainstream or anything like that. Like it's. And that both makes it the importance of books like Sheik of Mars and Galaxy's Edge, of which, by the way, I'm reading Imperator.
Yes.
Imperator is the best Galaxy's Edge of the 9 that are out so far, including it. My opinion. And I can't wait for the Medusa one to come out. And there better be Medusas in it, otherwise I'm just going to be disappointed. But... But these things make it more important. Like Corey is writing this crazy fantasies that I can't even keep track of anymore. David Halquist is writing this excellent sci-fi noir that starts on the moon and is currently somewhere on Mars, fighting psychic to psychic. With the other guy just pouring in as much firepower as he can. Like we've got all these great ideas showing up. And honestly, the planetary anthologies are the best anthologies I've read in a decade, at least. I'm probably all the time. Like we were producing, like in all the various places, are producing great literature. I cannot wait for the watershed moment, which I hope comes, like some sort of like golden age on the future or whatever. That. People start recognizing it. People start realizing, and and I don't mean just the people who are coming in now. It feels like it's just the barest trickle. but more and more and more, and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually, like, it's one of those things I kind of hope there's a moment where it's like, oh well, I guess we fail and everything shutters. I don't think it will, though, sadly. But someday like that would be nice.
I'll be honest, I've gotten out of predicting the future.
Oh, I'm not predicting the future. I'm just hoping. I'm just hoping. Like, it's like I'll never actually get a chance to cut off Chuck Wendig's hands. But you know what? I'll sit back with like a ginger ale or something. Just think about it. No more Star Wars books from that man. Oh.
Yeah, he's awful. I've never read anything he's written. I've never tried to read anything he's written. I just assume it'll be a gigantic waste of my time.
Yes. Like, it's one of those things where, like, they compared the I, Jedi book, if you ever read that back in the day.
I did not.
It's pretty good. It's not my favorite, actually. It doesn't meet up quite the Timothy Zahn ones. But they compared an excerpt from from Chuck Wendig's latest work to I, Jedi, which is Michael Stackpole, I think. Stackpole. And the quality between the two of them are so different as to be night and day. It's really a sorry state of affairs. I don't know where they find these guys. Like, I don't like it. Like, is there some rock, we need to take flamethrowers to or something? Like, like I'll read Japanese stuff. Now, I hate Japanese light novels, except for very, very few exceptions. But I'll read, like, Japanese stuff from another culture entirely with different values to us. And I can understand and appreciate their stories, or, from our own culture 150 years ago. I can appreciate their stories so much better than anything produced by anything mainstream today. And I use mainstream in the sense of what the companies produce, not what people are actually looking for.
Yeah, the big publishing, the big five are
isn't it four now?
Crashing because they're producing stuff that nobody wants. And now you see other companies getting into it's insanity. They need to, not that they will, but they need to focus on their business and not on using their business as a piggy bank to dole out money to politicians they like.
Right. It's certainly a nasty state of affairs. Just as a nasty state of affairs on Mars that our protagonist has to fight against to get his wife back. Same sort of thing. In fact, it's not a giant metaphor for literature. But if we're pretentious, we're going to say it is a giant metaphor for literature, and not at all a fun adventure story with plenty of sword fighting, a motorcycle chase, and a giant and genie and all other manners of technology. It's really unfortunate that we have to live through this era. But at least things are looking up. I spent the last 5 hours before this live stream reading Imperator. I got about 300 something pages into it. I haven't had a good feeling like this in a long time.
Do you want to talk about Solo?
Absolutely. But first, let me talk about one of our sponsors. Our sponsors, Knife Co., brassieres, and lingerie. For the Matahari, Red Sparrow, or other shadowy organizations' mind-controlled assassin, love of your life, choose the undergarment that holds so many knives, most steakhouses think it's a little bit extreme. Knife Co. Absolutely. Let's talk about Star Wars. Jason, because we're already talking about Star Wars. Daddy Warpig, tell me, how did you like or dislike or go into a frothing berserker rage at Solo?
I think Solo, there's two problems with Solo. One, Solo doesn't need to exist. There was no great empty spot in the universe because we didn't have Han Solo's backstory, at least the backstory of this version of the Kathleen Kennedy version of Star Wars. We didn't need to have it. And if the movie is bases you know, I'm going to say like 50% or 70% of its appeal on nostalgia. And so if it were the exact same movie with similar characters that did the same thing, but set in a completely different universe that is not set in Star Wars, it would be doing even worse than it is right now because no one would really care. The story isn't really super interesting. It isn't really super exciting. I'm not saying the whole thing is bad. I'm saying this is terrible. This is not a Last Jedi scale disaster. It's an okay movie, but so much of it, what's in the movie, is just based on appealing to nostalgia. It's like, oh, look, there's Han Solo. Okay, Han Solo is meeting Chewbacca for the first time. Okay, Han Solo is getting his iconic blaster from some other guy. Oh, Han Solo is getting on the Millennium Falcon. And just large parts of the movie are actually kind of incomprehensible unless you've seen Star Wars or other Star Wars movies. They're just pointless. And again, I want to stress, I'm not saying the movie is terrible. I'm saying it's a mediocre or maybe slightly less than mediocre movie that if it didn't have the Star Wars name attached to it, it would be doing even worse than it is.
Did you watch Annihilation or Blade Runner 2049 when they came out?
I saw Blade Runner 2049.
I recommend Annihilation to you. It's a little bit hit or miss, but I liked it quite a bit. Now, those movies were, in my opinion, excellent science fiction. The only reason they made... Sorry?
I did go see Annihilation.
Did you like it?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I'd have to re-listen to my review to remember enough about it to...
Yeah, don't worry about it. My memory is absolute butts. But I liked it.
When you see one or two science fiction movies and fantasy movies or action movies every week, they all start to blend together after a while.
Well, I hope Annihilation is that psychedelic drug trip that people hoped it was, but it wasn't at all. Sort of like that mushroom samba thing in some old like animated cartoons that I've seen where like things just go real crazy for some reason. And then they bring it all back because they lack water and desert or something. Anyway, like those movies were, in my opinion, very watchable, very good movies. They weren't without their flaws, and the flaws that showed to me might be bigger in other people than not. But objectively, I think that if we put them on the scale, they would be on the good end of science fiction, the things that we would want to see more of, even if we didn't like that example. But then there's movies like Solo and The Last Jedi and Geostorm, because from what I've seen of your Facebook posts, you didn't like it, if that's an accurate statement I can make.
It wasn't a great movie.
It wasn't a great yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think here's the thing about The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi was deliberately designed to spit in the face of every single Star Wars fandom there is. If you were a fan of the original films and hated The Force Awakens, the movie spat in your face because they ruined characters from the original trilogy, ruined Luke Skywalker, ruined Princess Leia, so on and so forth. But even if you were a fan of The Force Awakens and you wanted to see all of those plot elements and stories begin to come to a fruition, the movie was designed to spit in your face. Even if you were a fan of new Star Wars, the movie was designed to spit in your face by ruining all the characters from that movie. And Luke throwing the lightsaber over his shoulder, and Rey turning out awful, and Poe Dameron turning out awful, and they made the one black stormtrooper who was the kind of heroic character, one of the only heroic characters from the first movie. They made him into comic relief, and he was dragged around and made fun of, and his
I hate that Asian actress.
Yeah, his one big moment to shine was stolen from him for no reason whatsoever. the movie was designed to spit in everybody's faces.
Yep.
And so there was not a single redeeming feature of The Last Jedi, except maybe I thought the new Pokemon were kind of cool looking.
So my opinion on The Last Jedi is based entirely on its philosophies that he went in. He went in to destroy everything. But the problem is that when things, unless he did this deliberately, in which case he's still spitting in the face of people, is that in the end, they couldn't commit to their nihilism. They couldn't burn everything down. Somebody somewhere in the Star Wars chain said, yanked the chain and said, nope, 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 nope. You know, too dark, too dark. You know, you're too deep into it. You know, you can't have Rey just join Kylo Ren, and you can't have this, and you have to have Luke Skywalker's death pretend to have meaning, even though we all know it doesn't. You know, you got to do this, you know, but you can't have that, you know, nihilism all the way down. What will the stockholders think? And it ruined even the barest hint of something that could have redeemed that movie, of any grasp of hope that movie could have even one slight, bare minimum redeeming quality. It doesn't have, because in the end they flip-flopped. And to me, that's more offensive than pure nihilism. Because nihilism you can burn to death with a flamethrower. Flip-floppers, you just kind of pity.
I think it would have been an interesting movie, or would have been a more interesting movie, to have Rey go to this planet, to have Rey train with Luke Skywalker, to have her, you know, have to work and suffer and become a real Jedi, and then to have her go off and make the wrong decision and fall to the dark side of the Force with Kylo Ren, and they take over and start ruling the galaxy. And then in the next movie, Poe Dameron and the Stormtrooper have to go in and try to save her, and that's the big moral fight through the movie. And then she actually gets to be an interesting character who made choices, not just a Mary Sue, and she have a redemption arc in the third movie. And Poe Dameron and the Stormtrooper would both be heroes who helped rescue someone from their own, you know, their own anger and bitterness and resentment, and help them, you know, come back to the light side of the Force. And so she becomes a Jedi. I think that might have been two interesting movies to make, but it is obviously not the movie that Rian Johnson was even capable of making. He doesn't have enough insight into human nature to realize that having a good character, I mean, everything came for her easy, right? She didn't have to work for anything. And those kinds of people become lazy. They're easily corrupted. If everything comes to you easily, if you are so talented, how many people do we see that are so talented that they never really had to work? And when genuine pain and strife and struggles come into their lives, they collapse under the weight of it, or even under the weight of success, and go bad. That would have been an interesting arc. That would have made her Mary Sue-ness actually a part of the story, and not just blind worship of a strong female. That would have made her an interesting character, and you would have been able retroactively to redeem part of The Force Awakens by saying, okay, here she is. She does everything easily. She goes to train with Luke. She does everything kind of easily, but Luke is still pushing her, and she's having to struggle for the first time, and Kylo Ren is talking to her, and then she goes off and falls to the dark side of the Force, and that sets up the third movie. That would have been interesting.
We don't even have
what we got.
Absolutely. We don't have to change the major beats of the story to make it good. That's what makes it, like, thinking about this movie frustrating for me. Like, I see little hints of exactly what you said in different ways, of course. And I think, oh man, if Rian Johnson had anything like a backbone or skill, then he could have at least held the course. He could have had something where you and I could say, you know, hey, it wasn't the Star Wars movie we had, but at least we can see, you know, the good parts of it. But instead, it's all bad and uncommittal stuff. Like I was thinking about the suffering as you were talking about it, I have three things for that. The first is usually the people become lazy and they usually get into drugs. I have the only very artists don't do well with drugs. If it's something like weed, they usually stop producing anything like they should, and it becomes lazy, hackneyed POSs. Or if they get into like cocaine or something like that, they produce Jackson Pollock paintings or whatever stupid stuff. So it ruins them. Pain and suffering. Like I wrote Sheik of Mars in what I consider one of the worst years of my life. Straight up, I've had 28 years on this earth, nearly 29, and that's like top 3 of worst. I wrote it there. I am incredibly proud of this work. I know that even if people say, you know what, I don't like this Arabian flavor, that no one will be like, Ben, this is utter, butts. This is shit. You can't write this. You should cut off your hands, throw them in the grinder. You're just not cut out for writing. I don't think that'll happen. I know the story's good. The opposite end is, do you remember Christopher Paolini of Aragon fame?
Yeah, yes.
I have not heard of him past the Aragon series of books, which I stopped reading about midway through the second one. I think that he wrote a good Lord of the Rings knockoff, mixed in some Dragon Riders of Pern, some of the really, some really good stuff. I'm not criticizing him, but for how he wrote Aragon, we're all tomb robbers here. But by the second, even as soon as the second book, I can tell that he had lost whatever editing or drive or concern that he had. That he had for his first book, which wasn't great, but it was so shocking and it was so itself that it sort of pulled things off, that it was no longer writable. And that was about the drug samba that he did with the elves and the elder dragon that the elves were hiding away from Galbatorix. And I can still remember what the villain's name is. It wasn't a bad piece, but somewhere along the line, his success with Aragon ruined him. And so now, I don't even know if he's producing books anymore. Let me see.
Let me talk about Solo for a bit. I don't know if this is deliberate or if this was just Ron Howard's. Ron Howard directed Solo. Ron Howard of Happy Days fame. He directed Solo, and he filled it with, I want to say, unlike Rian Johnson, who set out to spit on everything Star Wars, no matter who you were, Ron Howard set out to make a movie that was chock full of fan service. That's what this movie is. It's basically an attempt to have, except for one character who's really obnoxious and doesn't need to be there, which is
the droid?
The droid, co-pilot. Just obnoxious every time they're on screen. The only saving grace of the movie is that character was on so little that they didn't really matter all that much. It was just a little bit of irritant. And I could get into the plot and stuff, but the point I want to make right now is that Ron Howard deliberately set out to make a fan service movie. At least that's what it seems to me, because the movie is filled wall to wall with fan service. And so that's what makes it better than The Last Jedi, is that he's not trying to affirmatively spit in the face of fans and is not trying deliberately to mock or have contempt for fans. He's making a movie that's meant for fans and meant for fans to love.
Didn't they bring him in like halfway through or something like that through this filming and whatnot? Depending
on what source you read, he may have reshot as much as 70% of the movie and remade with a new story or a new tone. The two directors who were making it before were apparently trying to make a comedy, sort of like Guardians of the Galaxy-esque humor.
That sounds gross, but keep going.
And Ron Howard was brought in to make it like a dramatic movie.
Yes.
They're just so many stupid touches in the movie. even though it's not grotesquely social justice the way just about everything else under Kathleen Kennedy is, it is it's still got, or it's still built in a culture of social justice. And so it has a ton of just tiny touches here and there that lower the movie's credibility. And it shows in that they don't really know how to make an actual adventure movie. They were trying to cross an adventure movie with a heist movie, and that with a film noir. That's what this movie is. It has adventure elements, it has film noir elements, and it has heist. A heist, like, you know, Ocean's 11 is the central core storyline in the movie, and neither of those three things. There's a reason why nobody makes adventure movies, action movies that are also heist movies, that are also film noir, where, you know, a hero is being tempted by a femme fatale. Nobody makes movies like that because those three things are meant to be separate. You're already adding science fiction. So film noir plus science fiction can work. Adventure movies plus science
Blade
fiction
Runner
does work, absolutely. And heist movies plus science fiction can work if you did it right. But
okay, well, I would like your opinion. Fast and Furious, is it science fiction?
In what sense?
As in using futuristic or now relatively hard science fiction, relatively futuristic technology, whatever the latest and greatest is, with the one big lie that that cars can do whatever they need them to do.
I mean, if you wanted to push the definition of science fiction, then Tom Clancy wrote science fiction, because techno thrillers, one of the things they did in the technology was he extended technology into places where it didn't actually exist. You know, in The Hunt for Red October, he said, okay, well, this magneto-hydrodynamic drive, which never has been able to be working, we'll just assume it works, and it makes this submarine stealthy. And that's what the whole, you know, plot is based around. So you could say that all of Tom Clancy is science fictional. In Rainbow Six, the plot is about people trying to make a worldwide plague. That's science fictional. And you can go on and on with that. I'm not saying he is or isn't. It doesn't. I don't care about splitting hairs that fine. But movies that have technology that don't exist can technically be science fiction on one level or another.
I'm just that's sort of like my troll question. I like hitting people with, just to see how they react to it, because that would mean that Fast Five is a sci-fi heist movie that works.
Yeah, and you can make those things, even though I've held this in public for over a year now. My belief is that fantasy and science fiction, that their métier, that their thing that they are best at is adventure stories. I'm not saying no other kind of stories can be told. I'm not saying no other kind of stories should be told. I'm not saying that. But what
I didn't interpret it as that either.
What some people have. So I like to get that. I like to get that disclaimer up front. But what they're best at, what they do best, is adventure stories. And adventure stories not only are fantasy and science fiction great for adventure stories, but adventure stories make the fantasy elements of a fantasy novel and the science fiction elements of a science fiction novel better. They are a great showcase for the imaginative qualities of your story. If you can make a great adventure story, you will show off your world building, you will show off your technological gadgets, you will show off, you know, all of this imagination you put into it better. Your stuff will appeal to the audience more. They will care about it more. They will get it more clearly if it's in context of adventure story. That is what it is. What that genre, fantasy and science fiction, is best at. But trying to mix film noir, there's a reason why Double Indemnity and the Maltese Falcon and say Die Hard are not the same thing. There's a reason why those movies are not in the same genre. They're great movies. I love all three of them. But Die Hard is an action movie, and the Maltese Falcon or other noir movies are not action movies, and they shouldn't be put together. They don't work together. The tone, the kind of stories you're telling, what you're dealing with are completely different things, and trying to meld them together makes a big mess, and that's what Solo is. It's a mess. That's what brings it down, fundamentally speaking. It's not just that they cast Han Solo kind of wrong. I don't think Air Knight was quite who they should have gotten for it. I'm not saying he was bad. He wasn't a terrible actor, but also wasn't a terribly good actor either. Emilia Clarke actually did a decent job in the movie, which I was unexpected because she did a horrible job in Genesis. But her problem too was that they were trying to make her into a film noir femme fatale character, and it just it didn't work. And she was also making choices that femme fatales didn't make. I'm guessing because of the strong woman thing, you have to show she's a strong woman. And so you completely undermine the adventure story. And this is kind of a little bit of spoilerific, not a lot. But
well,
a little,
hold on. Spoilers, I don't care about.
Okay.
Like, and I put it up here that we will actually mention spoilers. So spoil away to your heart's content.
Her decisions during the course of the movie don't even make sense within the femme fatale stereotype, because the femme fatale is a woman who is using social manipulation and sexual manipulation to get her to achieve her goals, because she can't stand up physically to males, because women are smaller, they are physically weaker, and they can't stand, shoulder to shoulder and toe to toe with a male. And so they have to use other means of influencing the situation, but they completely turn that around with her, having her at one point using physical force to defeat an enemy, which is ridiculous.
There's a reason why the vamp trope exists, and not and it's connected to the femme fatale and not this other stuff that they're trying to push on us.
So by trying to make her a strong woman, they ruined the noir part, they ruined the adventure part, they ruined the romance part of adventure stories. And then, the heist movie was all right. And they have the tricky double, triple cross at the end, like good heist movies can. But again, the machinations of a heist movie, what was it last year? It's a movie that didn't do really well, but it was still kind of good. It was about a bunch of Southerners who who were pulling off a heist.
I know what movie you're talking about. It had Daniel Craig in it for some reason. I never saw it though.
It was a good movie, but it had the kind of double, triple cross that can make for a great heist movie. I mean, even like Ocean's 11, which is and I know I praise that movie a lot because I really enjoyed it, and I also think it's one of the best modern examples of a heist movie. I'm not saying other heist movies can't also be great, but I think it's one of the best. Oh, Logan Lucky, that's what it's called. It has a great double, triple, double cross, and they tried to pull that off, but it runs into the adventure story, and it runs into and is trampled by the sort of film noir elements, which is all three of them don't quite fit together. And also the subtle SJW-ness that underlined a few of the choices made it worse. It was muddy. It muddied up all of those stories or all of those elements. And it could have been done so much better if they had just decided to focus razor sharp on one of those three. If it's going to be a heist movie, by gum and by golly, make the best heist movie you can in space. That would have been cool.
Oh yeah, I feel that you could probably combine 2 of 3 of those without too much trouble. Just in how I view it, we can probably hash it out sometime far in the future. But it sounds like they just try to stuff 2 in. I guess the question for me is if you only had to pay $5, would you see this movie? Like, is this movie worth going to see for $5? Because that's what the option is available for me.
I don't know. I would give it a qualified recommendation, which is it's really, really muddy, and that ruins whichever element you're going to the movie to see.
I see.
I mean, they in the introduction. Okay, so Kathleen Kennedy made this decision. It was a stupid decision, but I think it was a branding decision. I think they were worried about the audiences not getting that these interstitial movies like Rogue One and Solo and the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi movie. I just
got real depressed when you said that, but keep going.
I think that they weren't confident in their audience. They think their audiences are idiots. And so Rogue One didn't have this traditional Star Wars title crawl. And none of the movies that are off the main sequence of episodes, 7, 8, or 9, none of the movies are going to have a title crawl except for the main sequence of movies. And I think that was a branding decision. I think it was a stupid decision because the title crawl is one of the things that marks Star Wars movies as being in the Star Wars universe, and it would have been great. But it was even worse in this movie because they did 3 separate shots of exposition. That would have been great for a title crawl. They didn't have a title crawl, but they had to do it anyway. It was stupid. It made me shake my head and think, man, you people are morons. Just do the Star Wars title crawl. Go back to Rogue One, add it in. These 3, typed placards before the movie or whatever you call them, that is a title crawl, except it doesn't look like a title crawl. Dumb. Absolutely ridiculous.
I'll probably see it then if you don't think it's an absolute waste of money.
I've seen a lot of mediocre movies that are much, much better than this movie. I'm a fan of the Fast and the Furious movies, except for Tokyo Drift.
Really?
I like them. I enjoy watching them. I'm not saying they're great and landmark action movies, but they have a goal, which is to entertain you with action. They go through the movie, and that's what they did. I'm entertained. It didn't make me miserable. And I like the Resident Evil movies with Mila Jovovich. They had a goal, which is to entertain you with a zombie movie, and they go through and they do that. And so they hit the goal of their movie. Now, those may be B movies. I agree. I'm not saying they're great cinema. I'm not even saying they're great, as good as, landmark action adventure movies like Die Hard, but they're still fun and I still enjoy them. And I would be open to watching movies in those 2 series again. I would not be interested in seeing Solo again. I don't hate it. I'm not averse to it, but it wasn't good enough. I didn't have so much fun that I would see it again. There's a lot of fun stuff in there. They have a chase scene. That's pretty cool. They have shootout scenes that are pretty cool. A couple of them. And
so it does sound like it might be worth my $5. Just because I do like heist movies. I do like science fiction, even though I kind of view them as like molesting the dead corpse of a genre or series or whatever franchise. There we go. That's the word for it. I like, might be worth my $5.
I will say this. I was afraid that Donald Glover was badly miscast as Lando Calrissian, and he was badly miscast as Lando Calrissian. He was an awful, awful Lando Calrissian.
Donald Glover is very overrated in my opinion. Just utterly overrated. Like, not as bad as whatever poor guy plays Finn, because that guy makes me angry. Just because of, like, I'm sure you saw Pacific Uprising and did not like it. Am I right with that guess? Shot in the dark?
Yeah, it wasn't a terrible movie, but it wasn't a good movie. It wasn't notably good.
I absolutely hated it. It had none of the weight of the original. The soundtrack was worse. They didn't use any of the characters right and things. It's basically like a Mary Sue thing, but there were enough speed bumps in between that you didn't notice it at first, and that's how I take it. But I can't wait until that guy just disappears off the landscape. But
I thought he was great in Community because he was exactly what he was supposed to be in Community. He could play that character exactly as they were supposed to be played. And I don't know. I mean, well, there are tons of talented black actors who are young, who could have played Lando Calrissian, who could have done it well. Michael B. Jordan from the recent Black Panther movie, who is also in Creed. I think he could pull off a suave, smooth-talking guy. There's a lot of good actors out there that could have done it. Glover is just absolutely not the right person. He's a geek. He's not smooth, and it comes through in the character.
I've not heard a bad word about Michael B. Jordan yet.
He's nailed every performance I've seen him in. Creed, he was phenomenal in Creed. And the thing is, in Creed, he was playing a very, very stereotypical character. You know, the young kid who's hungry, who gets involved in a mentor and is kind of he's not really he fights with his mentor a lot. And that could come off as terrible because he's playing that kind of character that you've seen before, but he does it well. He carries it off well. I mean, I thought that movie was spectacular. Creed was just a spectacular movie.
I'll have to see it then, sometime.
It's a Rocky movie. You would appreciate it more if you've watched the Rocky series.
I haven't. Boxing movies aren't as, you know, I see their appeal. I just don't appreciate them personally, like I should. I did see The Expendables, though.
Expendables is excellent. The first and third are great movies. The second one is,
Yeah, I did like the first one. I haven't seen the third one yet. All right, then. Well, we've been going at it for about an hour. I'm going to talk about our last sponsor, then let you guys go.
Sure.
Do you have any last words for me, Daddy Warpig?
I'd give a qualified recommendation to Solo if you go in with low expectations. That's the other thing, too. I went into the movie with low expectations, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And so that made the movie look better in by way of comparison. Go in with low expectations, and you might find enough fun to make it worth $5.
I'll join you in that then. I will get drunk and lower my expectations down as much as I can. So, this episode has been brought to you by the fever dreams of Vince McMahon. Not the man himself, of course. He has no idea we exist, probably. But his fever dream marketing department. They're top tier, and their pectorals are second to none. Thank you for joining me, Daddy Warpig, and thank you to April Freeman, who joined us earlier in the live stream. Join us next week where we talk about the post-release of Sheik of Mars. And I think I am visiting with you next Saturday, if I recall. Is that right, Daddy?
Yes.
Warpig. Fantastic. I am looking forward to that. Not being the host of a show sounds more wonderful every day. Though I do thank you for being here, because having somebody on here provides me with so much direction. Thank you, and have a good night, everyone.